Good morning and welcome to Discover Christian Church. We're so glad you're here with us. Our mission is to love God, love people, and impact the world. All right, well, good morning, Discover. How is everybody feeling on this nice, crisp, winter-ish morning that we've got? Great, some cheers? Okay, yeah. Most people last service said cold, so you guys are definitely more awake and more excited than they are. And I'm super excited that you guys are all here today, whether it's your first time, you're a longtime member, if you're in person or you're online. I'm excited that you're here, and I'm excited to get to be here today and share this message with you. For anyone that doesn't know me, my name is Tyler Bruni, and I am the student minister here at Discover. So I get to hang out with these lovely young folk down here. Yeah, thank you, Cooper, thank you. All right, so we are currently in week 3 of our study or our teaching series on the book of Galatians called Freedom Through Christ. And now over the past 2 weeks, Steve has talked to us about Galatians chapter 1 and chapter 2, and he's talked about how because of Jesus, we are free, and we are free from the law. And today we're going to be talking about Galatians chapter 3. So if you want to go ahead and turn there into your Bibles now, go ahead, or if you want to pull up the YouVersion app, follow along there, that's a good place to do it as well. Today we are going to be talking about, well, kind of combining really these last 2 weeks, and talking about how we are free through our faith. More specifically, that we're free through our faith in Jesus from the law and from deeds that we would need to do. All right, so to start this morning out, I have a bit of a bombshell, some shocking news that I need to tell of you guys. This is going to be a huge revelation. It might change your life. Change is difficult. Okay, so not anything shocking, not a bombshell. Nothing crazy. Cooper got a little upset with me there that's all it was, okay? But this is something we've come to know, right? You've experienced in your life that change is difficult. You've started to understand this concept. But just because we know change is difficult doesn't really make it easier for us, right? Like, knowing something is difficult doesn't all of a sudden make it less difficult. Honestly, it could make it more difficult for us. You see, in clinical psychology, there is a term called institutionalization or the institutional syndrome. Now, this is kind of refers to the study of defects or disabilities that develop when someone spends a very long period of time in a place like prison, where they have no control over their life, they don't get to make decisions, they are told what to do. And then when they get out of prison or wherever they were, and they are all of a sudden back in control of their lives, they have to make all of these decisions and choices. They no longer really know how to function as a person. They don't know what to do with this time or how to go about living their life. Now, a great example of this comes to us from the movie Shawshank Redemption. Now, there are going to be some spoilers for this movie, but it's literally as old as me, so if you haven't seen it yet, I don't know what to tell you. You've had plenty of time. In the movie, Morgan Freeman plays a character named Red, and he is serving time in Shawshank State Penitentiary. And him and a group of inmates and his friends, they're sitting around, and he explains this concept to them, or this idea of institutionalization. Because right before this, one of their friends just got their parole approved. And instead of freaking out and being excited that they get to go and leave prison, they almost kill somebody to stay in prison because they don't know how to be a normal human outside. Morgan Freeman's character, like I said, he goes on to say this, and no, I'm not going to try a Morgan Freeman accent. I wish I could, guys, I'm sorry. But he says, I'm telling you, these walls are funny. First, you hate them. Then you get used to them, Enough time passes, you get so you depend on them. Later on in this movie, Red, who just explained to us this whole idea, is released from prison. And he gets a job, but he struggles. He doesn't understand what to do or know what to do. He doesn't have all of these boundaries, all of these things set up in his life telling him what to do at every waking moment. To the point where when he's at his job, he raises his hand and asks to use the restroom. This is not something that a normal adult would really do at work, right? It's not something that a fully grown man normally does. And it gets so bad, and he's so unsure of what to do, he thinks about going and committing a crime just so he can go back to prison. He wants to go back to this place that he knows, this place where he feels comfortable, where he understands the rules and how everything works. He wants to go back to what feels like home to him. Now, this is an incredibly heartbreaking thing to think about. Someone's home, or what feels like home to someone, is a place where they have no control, where they can't do anything without permission. This idea, though, is exactly what the Galatians are dealing with. And it's exactly why Paul is writing them this letter. See, most of them have spent their entire lives following every single rule of the law, being very careful to dot every I, cross every single T, make sure they didn't miss a thing, just so that they can try to please God. You see, they have been taught that this is what you do, this is how you live your life, and that is what pleases God. But now they're really struggling to adjust away from this and to understand that because Jesus came, these rules aren't what make us righteous with God. They're not what, earn God's approval. Instead, it's faith that does this. And it's faith in Jesus that does this. Let's go ahead and read from Galatians chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, for a little bit more context on this situation. You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Before your very eyes, Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed as crucified. I would like to learn just one thing from you. Did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law or by believing what you heard? Are you so foolish? After beginning by means of the Spirit, are you now trying to finish by means of the flesh? Have you experienced so much in vain, if it really was in vain? So again I ask, does God give you his Spirit and work miracles among you by the works of the law or by believing what you heard? So also Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Paul is not pulling any punches here. He's going straight in on the Galatians and tearing them apart. He's telling them, you guys, I came and talked to you. Christ was clearly portrayed as crucified. You had no reason to doubt that Jesus is the Messiah, that he came and he fulfilled these promises. And he's probably taking it maybe a little bit personally because of this. You see, in one of his sermons to them, Paul already kind of addressed this very same issue that they are now struggling with again. Acts chapter 13 contains part of the sermon that Paul speaks to the people in Galatia. And in verses 38 and 39, he says, "Therefore, my friends, I want you to know that through Jesus, the forgiveness of sins is proclaimed to you. Through him, everyone who believes is set free from every sin, a justification you were not able to obtain under the law of Moses." You see, the problem is the Galatians have been bewitched, or someone has cast a spell on them. More so, this means that they have been tricked or deceived. Someone with a silver tongue has come in and, managed to work their way into their brains and confuse them. They aren't quite certain anymore exactly what they believe. And this all has happened in the short time since Paul has left them. But we also know that from Paul talking about it and asking this question twice, they received the Spirit. The Spirit is working among them. So they had that faith. And now, as he says, after beginning by means of the Spirit, are you now trying to finish by means of the flesh? Are they going back to the law? They're going back to what they've always known. It would appear that the Galatians, or at least some of them, have fallen victim to the false teachings of a specific group known as the Judaizers, a faction of Jewish and non-Jewish believers who thought that Christians needed to both believe in Jesus and also follow the rules of the law. And now we can kind of see why it was so easy for these Galatians to fall back into the law, into what they're comfortable with, what they've grown up with, they've always known. Keeping the law, doing these things. But this brings us into a conflict. It's what Steve talked about last week, the issue of legalism, where the rules and the laws and making sure you follow them become the utmost important thing. Nothing is more important than making sure you do that. So you kind of just miss the heart behind it. You ensure you're doing good things, but you're not doing them for the right reason. And so they're no longer good. You see, the Pharisees struggled with this a lot. We've all read plenty of stories, Jesus calling them hypocrites multiple times because they just made sure that everything they did fell within the rules of the law. And they tried to make sure that everyone else did exactly those things. And when they didn't, they made sure to call them out on it. They missed the bigger picture. They missed the heart behind the law, the reason that this was given. Jesus, like I said, he calls them hypocrites multiple times, but my favorite description that he gives of the Pharisees is he calls them whitewashed tombs. They look beautiful and ornate on the outside, but the inside is full of death and rot. Not so pretty. Not the greatest picture. And that's the real issue with the law, is it can encourage us to do things for show, to look good. So others see us and go, man, they've got it together. I should be more like them. I want to be like them. Or, man, they're a great person. I suck compared to them. We make sure that we're in as many different Bible studies as we can be. Or we make sure that we go and we serve others, or we donate to charity. But again, we're missing the heart behind it. We're doing it to check a box and so that others know how great we are. We aren't doing it because we love God and we want to grow closer to Him and in fellowship with other believers. We're not doing it because we care about others who are less fortunate than us and we want to show them love. We're doing it because we love ourselves and we love that attention that we get. We love when other people see us and know how great we're doing. Jesus himself addresses this very issue in the very famous sermon of his, the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 6:1 says, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven." Jesus and now Paul are warning about this very issue. And notice that Jesus, in his words, doesn't say, don't do these things. He's not telling us not to do good things. He's telling us not to do them in front of others to be seen by them. We need to make sure that we are continuing to do good things and the things that God has called us to, but we're doing them with faith, and we're doing it through the Spirit. Now, I have this nice drawing or picture here of a horse, I think. Now, I have seen this show up many different times in my social media timelines. And it's almost always right after a movie series comes to an end or the series finale of a TV show. And people are really less than thrilled, we'll say, with how it ends. They think that this movie or this show started out amazing. The writers cared. They poured blood, sweat, and tears into writing it. But as time went on, they got lazy. They got money. They had other things that they wanted to do. And so they rushed the ending, and it looks like that. But I think this is a great example of what it looks like for us to try and finish by the flesh or by works of the law what the Spirit has started within us. When the Spirit is doing work in us, It forms this beautiful picture, all of these nice details. You know exactly what it is. But we also see that very quickly as we try and take over and think, I can do this, I can finish this, I've got this, it drops off to the point where if you only see the right half of the picture, I'm not sure you would tell me that it's supposed to be a horse. You might be very confused about what it's trying to be. And if we're trying to finish by our own means what the Spirit has started within us, what's that going to look like? Is that going to come out and meet the perfect standards that God has called us to? It can't. It can't possibly do that. As much as I love this picture, and as much as it makes me laugh, it is a great way to remember this point. You see, works of the flesh or the law will inevitably let us down. They will always fail us in the end. They are not what make us righteous and perfect in the eyes of God. They are not what we need to do in order to be saved. Now, Paul goes on to explain how the law does not supersede the covenant that God had made with Abraham, or the promise that God made to Abraham. In Galatians 3:15 through 18, he says, "Brothers and sisters, let me take an example from everyday life. Just as no one can set aside or add to a human covenant that has been duly established, so it is in this case. The promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. Scripture does not say, and to seeds, meaning many people, but and to your seed, meaning one person, who is Christ. What I mean is this: the law introduced 430 years later does not set aside the covenant previously established by God, and thus do away with the promise. For if inheritance depends on the law, then it no longer depends on the promise, but God in his grace gave it to Abraham through a promise." God in his grace gives it to Abraham through a promise. We read earlier that Abraham believes and he's justified by his faith. Abraham trusts God. He doesn't follow the law. It doesn't show up for 430 years. He doesn't know what the law is going to be. He simply has faith in God, that God is going to fulfill these promises that he has made to him. This promise being that Jesus would come and he would bless all of the nations through him, that he would take on sin for us. He would make us righteous. Now, this is super important because it's like a contract that you would sign today for work, or maybe people coming and working on your house, or buying and selling car or house, or whatever it is that you have a contract for. The promise that God made to Abraham is this binding agreement. And it's not one that has some weird loopholes in it that God can go back and later exploit to profit in some way. God blesses us through this promise. Abraham, again, is justified through faith, but his faith is in the coming of Jesus, who hasn't arrived yet. Abraham is justified by Jesus, who doesn't come for many, many years. And we are now justified through Jesus, who has come at this point. We get to be a part of that same promise that God made to Abraham. So, the law didn't replace that promise, and it can't replace that promise. It can't come in and override something that God has already agreed to. And this is great news for us, because if you haven't read it recently, the covenant that God makes with Abraham, super one-sided. God promises to do all of these amazing, great things, and he simply asks for us to be faithful. It's not that much, considering what God is promising. Continuing on in Galatians 3:22 through 24 tell us, "Before the coming of this faith, we were held in custody under the law, locked up until the faith that was to come would be revealed. So the law was our guardian until Christ came, that we might be justified by faith. Now that this faith has come, we are no longer under a guardian." As we were prisoners under the law. The ancient Jews were prisoners under this law. The Galatians were prisoners. And now they want to go back to that because that's what they've always known. It's what they've always understood and grown up having. Change is difficult. Staying with the same thing is easy. But we don't need the law. We are free from that. Jesus came and he fulfilled this promise, and we just need to have faith in him. So what does that mean? What does that look like in our lives? It's a very Sunday school answer. Have faith. Yeah. Okay, cool. Take the next step. What does that mean? What are you going to do to have faith? What are examples that we can look to have faith and to learn how to apply these things to our life? For me, I think an obvious place to start is going to Hebrews chapter 11, also known as the Hall of Faith. We read about many different people from the Old Testament who live by faith, who are justified by their faith. And it gives us these short little descriptions of who they are and what they did. So, if you want to go ahead and turn there, we're going to spend a little bit of time there. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4 starts out by telling us the story of Abel and a little bit about his faith. And it says, by faith, Abel brought to God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offering. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. So what did Abel do through faith? He brings God a better offering than his brother. Now, this wasn't because he wanted to show up his brother. Like, hey, God, look at me. I brought you something way better than that loser over there. No. Abel brought God what God deserved. He made a sacrifice to God of the absolute best of his flock. He understood that that is what God deserved. He didn't try or stop and think and be like, okay, well, let's see. I obviously keep the best for myself because it's mine, right? So God should be good with like second, maybe third best. That'll please him, right? Like he's still getting something from me. It's not what he did. He understood that everything that God had blessed him with, his flock, was a gift. None of it was actually his. It was entrusted to him to take care of, but it really belonged to God. Now, this example of Abel isn't like incredibly one-to-one, because I don't know about all of you guys, but I certainly don't raise a flock in my backyard. It's just, I don't have room for that. I barely have a backyard, honestly. And I certainly don't sacrifice animals to God. But what we all do is make small sacrifices to God, or we give things up for God. You see, here at Discover, that we believe that giving or tithing is a super important part of our worship. And it's not because we desperately want your money that you have worked for, but it's because, like Abel, we understand that everything we have been given, everything we have, is a gift from God, and it belongs to God. So we need to give first to God, not only with money, but with our time and our talents. We should be making sure that everything that God has blessed us with, we are using for him. It came from him. It belongs to him. A lot of this is about having the correct heart posture. The next person in the Hall of Faith is Enoch. Now, he's a super interesting person to read about, primarily because his name shows up 5 times in the Bible. And 2 of them, it's just his name written in a genealogy. It doesn't say anything about him. But we do know, and we read here, he has made it to the Hall of Faith. He did something so great that in the other 3 mentionings of him, he's made it to the Hall of Faith. So Hebrews 11, 5 and 6 tell us, by faith, Enoch, who was taken from this life, so that he did not experience death, he could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God, and without faith, it is impossible to please God. Because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So not only is he not talked about a lot, but he's taken from this life so that he doesn't experience death like Elijah. That's a pretty cool, exclusive club to be a part of. But more interestingly, or more importantly from these verses, we read that without faith, it's impossible to please God. Because see, in order to approach God, we need to have the faith that he exists. And we need to earnestly be seeking him out. And we understand that he rewards those who seek him. And I'm not talking, and this isn't talking like, oh yeah, he's going to make you rich, and he's going to solve all your problems, and everything's going to be fine and dandy. But what it is saying is that we remember that everything that we have here is a gift from him, and it's good. God made the world, and it was good. But what awaits us in heaven is far better. What we will receive when we go and spend eternity with God is infinitely better than anything we could ever have here. Now, moving on to the last character from here, or person we're going to take a look at, verse 7 tells us about Noah. We all know decently well Noah's story. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. So God warns Noah about this flood. And Noah responds faithfully by building an ark, which I'm sure to all of his friends and family, and probably even to himself, seemed a little bit crazy or super crazy. Why on earth would someone need that big of a boat? What is the point in doing that? What do you need to put on the boat? And the Bible doesn't exactly tell us how long it takes him to build the ark, but considering how large it is, it was a long time. Like years and years of his life, he devoted to building this ark, to faithfully serving God and doing what he had been called to do. He had all of the time in the world to sit there and question, what am I doing? This doesn't make sense. Like, why am I building this? My friends are all out having fun or doing other things. Why am I here building a boat? Luckily, he stayed faithful. He listened to God. He did what God had asked him to do because he understood that God had called him to do something far more important. So, kind of in summary of these points and these examples and what we can live out in our lives, we need to make sure that we are being the best possible stewards of everything that God has blessed us with. Time, talent, treasures. We need to make sure that we're using all of them in a way that serves God. All in a way that brings glory and honor to him. Because we want all of the glory to go to God. We should be happy when God gets the glory and not us. It's all for him and not for us. We need to be earnestly seeking God to know him better, to be in a relationship with him. And yes, we understand that he will give us a reward, but our reward isn't here on earth. It awaits us when we get to spend eternity with him. And we understand that when he calls us to do something, we need to listen. Even though in the moment it might feel like it's costing us something, it might feel like it doesn't make sense at all. We don't see the future. We don't see the full picture. We see in part. Now, there's some other simple things that we can do. And we don't have to really look any further than Jesus, because Jesus is our ultimate example. We can go through the gospel and we can look at all of the different things that Jesus did in his life and compare it to our life. Does our life match up with the life that Jesus lived or not? See, we as Christians are called to be disciples or apprentices of Jesus, meaning that we are supposed to spend time with him. We are supposed to become like him, and we are supposed to go out and do what Jesus did. See, we are supposed to make sure that in our time with Jesus, we have the correct heart posture, and that we're openly accepting what Jesus is telling us. And a really great way to help us do all of this is what I talked about last time. You guys might get sick of hearing it, but I'm not going to stop saying it. We need to slow down and listen. We need to make sure that we are providing time for God to speak to us. You see, Jesus lived an unhurried life, and we need to make sure we're living a life more like Jesus. We read that Jesus often withdrew to lonely places to pray, or that he gets up early and goes somewhere to pray. He makes sure that he has this time to spend with God. He doesn't let it fall by the wayside, but he also makes sure that he's paying attention to those around him and showing them love when the opportunities come up. And I'm sure that all of us would agree we can spend a little bit more time in our days praying or reading the Bible. I don't know if I've ever ended a day and been like, man, I read too much Bible today, or I prayed for way too long. I wasted my time there. But we need to make sure when we're doing these things, again, we have the right heart posture. We're doing it because we feel led by the Spirit to spend time with God and grow closer to him. Not because we have a nice checklist and we want to get that box checked off so that we can go and do other things that we think might be more fun. We really want to grow closer to God and closer in community with our fellow believers and talk about what we've been learning and grow together and serve others. You see, it's really important in these moments that we have the right heart posture, that we spend time with other people who are like Jesus, and that we spend time with Jesus and praying and all of that. But if our heart isn't in the right spot, it's not going to do a whole lot. Look at Judas. He spent 3 years with Jesus. He walked with him everywhere he went, but his heart wasn't in the right place. Being around Jesus-y things or Jesus-y people or even Jesus himself isn't going to change you if your heart isn't open to it, if you're not being faithful. From what we can read, it appears that Judas was maybe in it for money or for influence that he thought he would have if Jesus was the Messiah, because they thought he was going to come, conquer the Romans, and have an empire there on earth, and he was going to get to be one of the people that ruled with Jesus, which sounds like a pretty sweet job, right? But he wasn't in it for the love of Jesus. He was in it for the love of himself. Along with having that heart posture, we just need to make sure, again, serving open-handed. We're willing to give up whatever it is God is asking us to and to take on whatever it is that God is asking us to make sure that we are being the best possible followers we can be, that we're pointing people to Jesus, that we're making sure that that is what people see when they see us. You see, again, we understand that in heaven we have this great reward waiting for us. So why on earth would we settle for most people we know knowing who Jesus is? Why would we think, well, I've got this great thing waiting for me, but the earth is fine for them. They don't need to know who Jesus is. We need to keep pursuing others, making sure that they see the faith of Jesus in us and that we can help point them to Jesus the way that we have been called to. Over the last couple of years, one of my favorite TV shows has been the TV show Last Man Standing. Yes, thank you, Steve. Now, Last Man Standing stars Tim Allen playing Mike Baxter. And if you haven't seen the show, but you have seen Home Improvement, they're incredibly similar characters, honestly. See, Mike Baxter and his friend Ed started a chain of stores called Outdoor Man, and Mike is now in charge of marketing there. The store is basically your Cabela's or Bass Pro Shop that we have in real life. And one of the other main characters throughout the show is Kyle. And Kyle, well, he's a great guy, but he's not known for being the most intelligent or, picking up on things or always knowing exactly the right thing to do. But what Kyle is a master of, and what we see time and time again through him in the show, is faith. It's trust. It's understanding that when you're called, you can do it. Let's go ahead and watch this clip.
Hey, Kyle, could you step in here a minute? I want to ask you something. Thanks. Okay, I don't really know how I'm going to do this, so you feel free to chime in with any ideas. It's pretty well known you're a big Badinsky.
Hey, you called me, sir?
Yeah, and you came. You can go. Kyle.
Yes. Is there something you need me to do?
Yes, there is, and you can go. Kyle.
I am right here.
Why do you keep coming in?
Because you keep calling me. If this is one of your teaching moments, sir, can we get to the teaching part? Because I'm getting a little throw-uppy.
I called you because I need you to do something, and you came before you knew you could do it. Why is that?
Because if you didn't think I could do it, you wouldn't have called me.
Yeah. I think we've arrived at our teaching moment.
All right. So this teaching moment that they have arrived at in the show, Kyle and the minister at his church feel like Kyle is being called into ministry. And he's super nervous about it, really uncertain if that's what he's supposed to do, or if he can do that and live up to those expectations. But just like Mike, his boss and father-in-law in the show, he understands, and we learn that if God is calling him to do something, it means that he already knows that he can do it. God knows that Kyle can do this. God knows that you guys can do this. God is calling us all to be faithful to him. And he knows that we can do it. It's not a question in his mind. God made a way for us through his son, Jesus. We have a path to follow. We have so many great examples of faith that we can follow and just pursue God and his heart. So it comes down to this. God is calling. God is never wrong. How are you going to respond? Are you going to respond faithfully and listen to what God is calling you to do? Or are you going to run away? Let's go ahead and pray. Father, I'm so thankful for today that we can all come here together, dive into your word, learn more about you, and grow closer to you, Father. I thank you for every single person in this room today, and I pray that their hearts are open to you and to the Spirit's work in their lives, that we are able to all continue to follow after Jesus and this path that you have made for us, that we're able to stay focused and respond faithfully when we are called. It's in your Son's name that we pray. Amen.